March 14, 2014, morning. The town of Millbrook, Pennsylvania, woke that Friday to a bitter cold that clung to the Allegheny foothills like a curse. Gray clouds pressed low against the skeletal branches of oak trees lining Maple Street, where the modest two-story homes stood close together, their vinyl siding weathered by decades of harsh winters. It was the kind of morning where breath turned to fog and car engines protested before turning over. Detective Marcus Webb pulled his unmarked Crown Victoria to the curb 3 houses down from 247 Maple Street, killing the engine but leaving the keys in the ignition. At 42, Webb had worked homicides for the Pennsylvania State Police for nearly 15 years, long enough to recognize the particular heaviness in the air when death visited a place it had no business being. Through his windshield, he could see the cluster of patrol cars, their light bars dark, but their presence screaming tragedy to every neighbor peering through curtains. The call had come in at 6:47 a.m., unresponsive infant, possible SIDS. But the dispatcher's voice had carried that edge that veteran cops recognized instantly, the edge that said this was something worse. Webb stepped out into the cold, his breath materializing in short bursts as he buttoned his wool coat. His leather shoes crunched against road salt scattered across the sidewalk. The house at 247 was unremarkable. Pale yellow siding, white shutters, a small front porch with a faded welcome mat. A child's plastic slide sat in the side yard, dusted with frost. The ordinariness of it made what waited inside feel more obscene. Officer Jennifer Kowalski met him at the door, her young face pale beneath her cap. "Detective Webb, it's bad." "Where are the parents?" "Kitchen. The mother found him. Sarah Harper, 24. Father's Derek Harlan, 28, unmarried but living together. Baby's name was Liam, 3 months old." Webb caught the past tense. "Was?" Kowalski's jaw tightened. "You need to see him, sir. It doesn't look like SIDS." The house interior was warm, almost stifling. The living room showed signs of young parenthood. Folded laundry on the couch, baby bottles drying on a rack in the kitchen, visible through the doorway, the faint smell of formula and exhaustion. Webb had been in hundreds of homes over his career, and he'd learned to read them like crime scenes, even before finding evidence. This home spoke of strain, the kind that came from sleepless nights and money stretched thin and 2 people barely keeping their heads above water. "Upstairs?" Webb asked. Kowalski nodded. "Second door on the left." The stairs creaked under Webb's weight. Family photos lined the stairwell wall. Sarah and Derek at what looked like a county fair, both younger and smiling. A maternity photo. Sarah's hand on her swollen belly, Derek's arms around her waist. The most recent showed them in the hospital. Sarah exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a blue blanket. Derek stood beside the bed, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. The nursery door stood open. Crime scene photographer Tom Rodriguez was documenting the room, his camera flash creating brief moments of stark illumination. Medical examiner Dr. Patricia Chen knelt beside the white wooden crib, her gloved hands hovering over something Webb couldn't yet see. "Marcus," Chen said without turning, "come look at this." Webb crossed to the crib, his heart rate steady despite what he was about to witness. You never got used to dead children, but you learned to compartmentalize, to turn your horror into fuel for finding answers. Liam Harper lay on his back in the crib, dressed in light blue pajamas decorated with tiny elephants. At first glance, he could have been sleeping. His eyes were closed, his tiny fists curled near his face. But Webb's trained eye caught the details that transformed sleep into death. The slight discoloration around the mouth, the unnatural stillness of the chest, and his stomach clenched, the faint bruising around the neck. "Petechial hemorrhaging in the eyes," Chen said quietly, pulling back one of the infant's eyelids to show the telltale red spots. bruising consistent with manual compression of the throat. I'll need to do a full autopsy, but Marcus, this wasn't SIDS. This baby was strangled. Webb felt the familiar cold focus settle over him. A 3-month-old infant, murdered in his own crib. How long? Based on rigor and liver temp, I'd estimate death occurred between midnight and 3 a.m. I'll narrow it down once I get him on the table. Signs of struggle? None that I can see. Given his age and size, it wouldn't have taken much force or much time. Chen's voice was clinically detached, but Webb had worked with her long enough to see the tightness around her eyes. She had 3 kids of her own. There's something else. She carefully lifted the infant's right arm. Even through his professional detachment, Webb felt his jaw clench. Faint bruises, finger-shaped, marked the baby's upper arm. Old bruises, Chen continued, maybe a week, 10 days. And here, she indicated the left thigh. Another set. Someone's been rough with this child for a while. Webb pulled out his notebook, his pen moving in quick, practiced strokes. The parents downstairs, what's their condition? Officer Kowalski had followed him up. Mother's hysterical, father's quiet. Too quiet, if you ask me. He called 911, not her. Says he woke up to use the bathroom, checked on the baby out of habit, found him unresponsive. And the mother, Undine, says she last checked on Liam around midnight when she got home from work. She's a nurse at Millbrook General, works the evening shift, says the baby was sleeping fine. She went to bed, woke to her boyfriend yelling to call 911. Webb studied the room. Organized, but not obsessively so. A changing table held stacks of diapers and wipes. A dresser stood against one wall, its top holding a monitor, several stuffed animals, and a framed photo of Liam at what looked like 1 month old. The window was closed and locked from the inside. No signs of forced entry, no signs of disturbance, except for one detail that made Webb's instincts prickle. The crib sheet, he said. It's been changed recently. Rodriguez stopped photographing. How can you tell? Hospital corners, tight, professional. Webb pointed. Most parents don't make cribs that neatly, especially exhausted parents of a 3-month-old. And look, he indicated a small plastic hamper near the changing table. There's a crib sheet in there with what looks like formula stains. Why change the sheet in the middle of the night? Chen met his eyes. The unspoken communication between them was clear. Someone had cleaned up. I need to talk to the parents, Webb said, separately. The kitchen was cramped but clean, the kind of space that had probably been updated 30 years ago and left untouched since. Sarah Harper sat at a small table, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that had long gone cold. She wore purple scrubs with cartoon characters on them, her uniform from the hospital. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and her eyes were red and swollen from crying. She looked up when Webb entered, and he saw genuine devastation in her face. Miss Harper, I'm Detective Marcus Webb with the Pennsylvania State Police. I'm so very sorry for your loss. Sarah's face crumpled. I don't understand. He was fine. He was perfect. How could this happen? Webb pulled out a chair and sat across from her, keeping his posture open and non-threatening. I know this is incredibly difficult, but I need to ask you some questions. Can you walk me through last night? Sarah nodded, wiping her eyes with a tissue that was already shredded. I worked the 3 to 11 shift at the hospital, pediatric wing. I got home around 11:30, maybe 11:40. Derek was on the couch watching TV. Liam was asleep in his crib. You checked on him? Always. I'm a nurse, I can't help it. I went straight upstairs, looked in on him. He was sleeping on his back, just like you're supposed to. He looked perfect. Her voice broke. He was perfect. Webb made notes. What time did you go to bed? Around midnight. I was exhausted. I'd been on my feet for 8 hours. Did you hear anything during the night? Crying? Movement? Sarah shook her head. I'm a heavy sleeper when I'm that tired. I didn't hear anything until Derek was shaking me awake, telling me to call 911. What about earlier in the evening? Before you left for work? How was Liam then? Fussy. He'd been fighting sleep all week. Colic, the pediatrician said. Derek was supposed to give him a bottle around 8 and put him down. He texted me at 8:30 saying Liam was down. Webb kept his expression neutral. How has Derek been handling the stress? New baby crying through the night? That's hard on anyone. Something flickered across Sarah's face. Fear, hesitation. It's been an adjustment for both of us. Has Derek ever lost his temper with Liam? Even just raised his voice or held him too roughly when he was frustrated? Sarah's eyes widened. What are you saying? You think Derek hurt our baby? I'm not saying anything, Ms. Harper. I'm trying to understand what happened. Derek would never, but she stopped, and in that pause, Webb heard volumes. Ms. Harper, this is important. Has Derek ever been rough with you or with Liam? The silence stretched for 5 heartbeats. Sarah stared at her cold coffee. Derek has a temper sometimes, when he's stressed about work or money, but he wouldn't kill his own son. But he's put his hands on you before. Sarah's composure cracked. Tears spilled down her cheeks. A couple times, shoving. Once he grabbed my arm hard enough to bruise. But that was months ago, before Liam was born. He promised he'd change. Webb felt the case taking shape in his mind. The terrible, familiar shape of domestic violence escalating behind closed doors. Did he promise to change after he hurt you, or after you threatened to leave? Sarah looked at him with eyes that held too much truth. After I told him I'd call the police if he ever touched me again. And when was the last time Derek hurt you? 2 weeks ago, we were arguing about money. He pushed me against the refrigerator. She touched her lower back unconsciously. But he's never touched Liam. Never. Webb kept his voice gentle. Ms. Harper, when I was upstairs, Dr. Chen found bruises on Liam's arms and leg. Old bruises from maybe a week or 10 days ago. Finger-shaped bruises. Do you know anything about that? The color drained from Sarah's face. Oh my God, there was one night last week. Liam wouldn't stop crying. I was at work. When I came home, Derek seemed off, stressed. Liam had finally fallen asleep, but the next day when I was changing him, I noticed he flinched when I touched his arm. I thought maybe I'd been too rough putting him in his car seat, but... She covered her mouth with her hand. Jesus Christ, did Derek kill our baby? That's what I'm trying to determine. I need you to think carefully. Last night, when you checked on Liam at midnight, you said he was sleeping on his back. Was the crib sheet the same one that had been on there in the morning? Sarah blinked, confused by the change in direction. I don't know. Why? Because there's a sheet with formula stains in the hamper, and the sheet on the crib now is perfectly clean and very tightly made. Did you change the sheet last night? No. I checked on him and went to bed. So if the sheet was changed, Derek would have done it. Understanding dawned in Sarah's eyes, followed by horror. He cleaned up. Oh God, he killed Liam, and then he cleaned up. Webb reached across and put his hand on hers. Ms. Harper, I know this is unbearable, but I need you to stay here with Officer Kowalski while I talk to Derek. Can you do that? Sarah nodded, her whole body shaking. Webb found Derek Harlan in the living room, sitting on the edge of the couch with his hands clasped between his knees. He was a big man, over 6 feet, with the solid build of someone who worked with his hands. His dark hair was tousled, and he wore sweatpants and a t-shirt. When he looked up at Webb, his eyes were dry. Mr. Harlan, I'm Detective Marcus Webb. Derek stood, extending his hand. His grip was firm, controlled. Call me Derek. Have you figured out what happened to my son? Webb noted the phrasing, not my baby or Liam. My son, possessive. That's what I'm working on. I need to hear your account of last night. Derek sat back down, and Webb took the armchair across from him. Close enough to read micro-expressions, but far enough to not crowd. It was a dance he'd perfected over hundreds of interviews. "I got home from work around 6, Derek began, his voice steady. "I'm a mechanic at Patterson's Auto on Route 22. Sarah had left Liam's bottle in the fridge with instructions. The kid was fussy as hell, crying non-stop. I heated the bottle, fed him, walked him around until he finally crashed around 8:30. Texted Sarah to let her know. Then I watched TV, had a couple beers, went to bed around 11. Sarah says she got home around 11:30. Were you still awake?" "Yeah, I was on the couch. We talked for maybe 5 minutes. She was tired, went to check on Liam, then went to bed. And you stayed downstairs for another half hour or so. Then I went up to bed." Webb leaned forward slightly. "Walk me through your movement after you went upstairs, every detail." Derek's eyes flickered, the first sign of nervousness. "I brushed my teeth, got in bed. Sarah was already asleep. I fell asleep pretty quick. And then I woke up to use the bathroom. I don't know what time, 2, 3 maybe. On my way back, I checked on Liam. That's when I found him." Derek's voice remained steady, but Webb saw his hands clench. He wasn't breathing. "I tried CPR. I learned it in a work safety course, but he was already cold. I yelled for Sarah to call 911. "Why did you check on Liam at 2 or 3 in the morning? Was he crying?" "No, just habit, I guess. Even though you were exhausted and it was the middle of the night, you detoured to check on a baby who was sleeping quietly." Derek's jaw tightened. "What are you implying?" "I'm not implying anything, Derek. I'm trying to understand the timeline." Webb flipped through his notebook. "You said when you found Liam, he was already cold. That indicates he'd been dead for at least an hour, possibly longer, which means he died sometime between midnight and 2 a.m. "I don't know when he died. I found him at whatever time I woke up." Webb changed tactics. "Derek, how have you been handling the stress of fatherhood? 3-month-old babies are exhausting. The crying, the lack of sleep, the financial pressure." "We've been managing. Have you? Because Sarah mentioned you've been under a lot of stress at work. Money's tight. And babies at this age, they cry, sometimes for hours. That would test anyone's patience." Derek's eyes hardened. "I didn't hurt my son. I didn't say you did. But I need you to be honest with me. Have you ever lost your temper with Liam? Maybe held him too tight when he wouldn't stop crying? Shaken him a little to make him quiet down?" "No." The answer came too quick, too defensive. Webb held his gaze. "Derek, Dr. Chen found bruises on Liam's body. Old bruises from about a week ago. Bruises that match adult fingers. How did those get there?" For the first time, Derek looked away. "I don't know. Maybe Sarah was too rough with him. She gets frazzled sometimes." "You're going to blame this on Sarah? The woman who works 8-hour shifts on her feet, taking care of sick children, and then comes home to care for her own baby?" Derek's hands clenched into fists. "I'm not blaming anyone. I'm saying I don't know." Webb stood slowly, maintaining eye contact. "Here's what I know, Derek. I know that crib sheet was changed in the middle of the night. I know you're the only one who had the opportunity to do that. I know Liam has old bruises that indicate someone's been rough with him. And I know that when Sarah found out what happened, the first thing she did was break down. But you? Your eyes are dry. You're calm. Almost too calm for a man whose infant son just died." Derek rose to his feet, towering over Webb. "What the hell is that supposed to mean?" "It means I'm ordering an autopsy. It means every inch of this house is now a crime scene. And it means you're not going anywhere while I investigate exactly what happened to your son." The muscles in Derek's jaw worked. For a moment, Webb thought he might swing. But then Derek sat back down heavily, his head in his hands. "This is insane. I didn't hurt my son. I loved him. Webb heard the past tense again. Loved, not love. Then help me understand what happened, because right now, all evidence points to someone in this house killing that baby. And if it wasn't you, Derek, then you need to tell me everything you know. But Derek just shook his head, silent. Webb stepped out onto the porch, pulling his phone from his pocket. The cold air bit at his exposed skin, a sharp contrast to the stifling warmth of the house. He dialed his lieutenant. "Webb here. I need a warrant for 247 Maple Street, full forensic workup. And call the DA, we're going to need to move fast on this one. I've got a dead 3-month-old, evidence of prior abuse, and a father whose story doesn't add up." As he spoke, Webb watched through the window as Derek sat motionless on the couch. Something wasn't right. The pieces were there, but they didn't quite fit together yet. In his experience, domestic abusers who killed in a rage typically either confessed immediately or constructed elaborate alternative scenarios. Derek was doing neither. He was simply waiting. Webb had learned to trust his instincts, and right now they were screaming that this case was more complicated than it appeared. As he ended the call and prepared to return inside, one thought crystallized in his mind. Someone had murdered baby Liam Harper in his crib. And before this day was over, Webb intended to know exactly who and exactly why. The only question was whether the truth would come out through investigation or whether he'd need to get creative. Inside the house, a mother grieved and a father sat in silence. And somewhere in the space between their stories lay the answer Webb was determined to find. March 15th, 2014, Saturday morning. The interrogation room at the Pennsylvania State Police Barracks in Somerset smelled of stale coffee and industrial cleaner. Detective Marcus Webb sat across from Derek Harlan, a metal table between them, watching the man who'd spent the last 24 hours in a holding cell. Derek looked haggard now, his confident demeanor from yesterday cracked around the edges. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his stubble had grown into the beginning of a beard. "You want coffee?" Webb asked, pushing a styrofoam cup across the table. Derek wrapped his hands around it but didn't drink. "When can I leave?" "That depends on you." Webb opened a manila folder, spreading crime scene photos across the table. He'd done this hundreds of times, the strategic revelation of evidence, watching for the micro-expressions that revealed guilt or innocence. The autopsy results came back. "Doctor, Chen confirmed what we suspected. Liam was manually asphyxiated. Someone pressed on his throat until he stopped breathing." Derek stared at the photos, his face unreadable. "It wasn't me." The bruising pattern matches adult male hands. The force required indicates someone strong, someone who works with their hands. Webb leaned forward. "Someone like a mechanic. Half the men in Millbrook work with their hands. That doesn't prove anything." Webb pulled out another photo, the bruises on Liam's arms and leg. "These older injuries tell a story, Derek. A story about escalating violence, about someone losing control when a baby cried too much. I told you I don't know where those came from. You're still blaming Sarah. Because we talked to her ER colleagues, nurses who've known her for 3 years. They all say the same thing. She's patient, gentle, completely devoted to that baby. But you know what else they said?" Webb paused for effect. "They said she'd been coming to work with bruises, wearing long sleeves in summer, the classic signs." Derek's jaw clenched. "Sarah's clumsy. She runs into things." "Is that what you told her to say?" Webb's voice hardened. "Here's what I think happened. Liam wouldn't stop crying that night. Sarah was at work, so you were alone with him. You'd been drinking. We found 4 empty beer bottles in your recycling. The crying got to you. Maybe you just wanted him to be quiet for 5 minutes, so you squeezed just enough to make him stop. But you squeezed too hard or too long, and suddenly your son was dead in your hands." Derek shot to his feet, the chair scraping against linoleum. "That's not what happened." Then tell me what did happen. Webb stood as well, matching his energy. Because right now you're looking at murder one, life without parole. But if it was an accident, if you just lost control for a moment, we can work with that. Manslaughter. Maybe you'd see daylight again before you're 60. I want a lawyer. Webb had expected this. That's your right. But before I walk out this door, you should know. Sarah's cooperating fully. She's given us statements about your history of violence, about the arguments, the shoving, the threats. She's painting a picture of a man barely holding it together and a baby whose crying was the last straw. Derek's hands trembled. Sarah wouldn't. She already did. She's protecting herself now, Derek. Can you blame her? Webb gathered the photos. Think carefully about your next move, because once lawyers get involved, deals go off the table. He left Derek alone in the room, watching through the two-way mirror as the man slumped back into his chair. Webb's partner, Detective Linda Chen, no relation to the ME, appeared beside him with 2 fresh coffees. Think he'll crack? Linda asked. She was 38, sharp as a razor, with instincts that had closed more cases than Webb could count. Not yet. He's scared, but he's also calculating. I saw it yesterday at the house. He's thinking 3 moves ahead. Webb sipped his coffee. What did you get from the warrant search? Linda consulted her tablet. Forensics pulled the sheets from the hamper. They're covered in baby formula and saliva, consistent with normal use. But there are also trace amounts of blood, Liam's blood. DNA match confirmed. So Derek changed the sheets to hide evidence of violence. Looks that way. We also found Sarah's journal in the bedroom nightstand, dated entries going back 6 months. It's damning, Marcus. She documents Derek's temper, his drinking, his rough handling of Liam. There's an entry from March 7th, exactly a week before the murder, where she writes about finding bruises on the baby after Derek watched him alone for an evening. Webb felt the case solidifying. Did she ever threaten to leave? Multiple times, but she always talked herself out of it. Money problems, nowhere to go, hoping he'd change, classic abuse cycle. Linda paused. There's one more thing. We pulled Derek's phone records. The night of the murder, he sent a text at 2:47 a.m. To who? His brother, Kyle Harlan, lives in Pittsburgh. The text said, handled the problem, don't call. Webb set down his coffee. That's practically a confession. Kyle claims he has no idea what it means. Says Derek was probably drunk texting about some issue at work, but combined with everything else. Linda met his eyes. We've got him, Marcus. The evidence is there. We just need him to admit it. What about the funeral? When's that happening? Tomorrow, 2 p.m. at Holy Cross Church on Main Street. Small service, family and close friends only. Sarah's devastated but functioning. She's been staying with her mother since we released the scene. Webb made a decision that had been forming since yesterday. I'm going to attend, undercover. Linda raised an eyebrow. You think Derek will incriminate himself at his own son's funeral? I think grief does strange things to people, makes them careless. If Derek's guilty, the pressure of maintaining appearances might crack that control he's been showing. Webb pulled out his phone, scrolling through contacts. I'll go as Sarah's distant cousin from Ohio, someone she hasn't seen in years. You coordinate with the local uniforms for outside surveillance. It's risky. If Derek recognizes you, he won't. We've only interacted in interrogation settings. I'll grow out my stubble, wear glasses, civilian clothes. I'll blend in. Webb glanced back through the mirror at Derek, who sat motionless, staring at nothing. That man is hiding something. I can feel it. And people reveal truths at funerals they'd never say anywhere else. March 16th, 2014, Sunday afternoon. Holy Cross Church was a modest white structure that had stood on Main Street since 1887, its steeple visible from anywhere in downtown Millbrook. By 1:30 p.m., cars lined both sides of the street, the kind of turnout a small town gives when tragedy strikes one of its own. Grey clouds threatened rain, and the March wind carried the bite of winter's last gasp. Webb stood across the street, leaning against a lamppost with his hands in the pockets of a dark overcoat. He'd traded his usual suit for khakis and a sweater under the coat, added wire-rimmed glasses, and let 2 days of stubble shadow his jaw. To anyone watching, he was just another mourner arriving early. He'd studied the guest list Sarah had provided, about 40 people expected, mostly family and neighbors, a few of Sarah's nursing colleagues. Derek's side was smaller, his brother Kyle, their mother Linda Harlan, and a handful of friends from the auto shop. Webb had memorized faces from social media, prepared backstories, rehearsed his role. The hearse arrived at 1:45, followed by 2 limousines. Webb watched as Sarah emerged from the first, supported by an older woman who had to be her mother. Sarah wore a simple black dress, her blonde hair pulled back, her face pale and drawn. She moved like someone in shock, each step mechanical. Derek exited the second limousine, flanked by his brother and mother. He wore an ill-fitting black suit, probably rented. His face was a mask, composed, appropriate, revealing nothing. Webb watched him scan the growing crowd, noting how his gaze lingered on certain faces, checking who showed up, who might be watching. The small white casket was carried into the church by the funeral director and an assistant, so tiny it barely required 2 people. Webb felt the familiar anger rise in his chest, anger he'd learned to channel into focus. A 3-month-old baby in a box, and somewhere in this crowd stood the person who put him there. Webb crossed the street, joining the flow of mourners entering the church. Inside, the space was intimate. Wooden pews, stained glass windows, filtering weak daylight into colored shadows, the smell of old hymnals and furniture polish. Soft organ music played. The casket sat at the front, closed, surrounded by white flowers. He chose a seat 4 rows from the back on the left side, close enough to observe but far enough to avoid attention. The pews filled quickly. Webb recognized faces from his research, neighbors from Maple Street, nurses from Millbrook General in their civilian clothes, mechanics in uncomfortable suits. Sarah and Derek sat in the front row on opposite sides of the aisle, a detail Webb found significant. Sarah kept her mother's hand clasped in her own. Derek sat rigid between his brother and mother, staring straight ahead. Pastor Richard Coleman, a man in his 60s with kind eyes, took the pulpit. We gather today in grief and confusion, struggling to understand why God would call such a young soul home. Webb tuned out the eulogy, focusing instead on body language. Sarah cried quietly, her shoulders shaking. Her mother whispered comfort. The nurses nearby dabbed at tears. Genuine grief radiated from their section of the church. Derek's side was different. Kyle kept glancing at his brother with an expression Webb couldn't quite read. Concern? Suspicion? Linda Harlan stared at the casket with dry eyes, her mouth pressed into a thin line, and Derek himself sat motionless, his face blank, his hands folded in his lap. Sarah has asked to say a few words, Pastor Coleman announced. Sarah stood shakily, approaching the pulpit with her mother's support. She pulled a folded paper from her pocket, her hands trembling so badly the paper rustled audibly. Liam was perfect, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. He had these blue eyes that looked right through you, and when he smiled, which wasn't often enough, it lit up the whole room. He loved being held. He loved music. He loved... Her voice broke. He deserved a life. He deserved to grow up. He deserved better than what he got. The last sentence hung in the air, loaded with meaning. Webb saw Derek's jaw tighten, his first visible reaction. Sarah continued, her voice gaining strength. "Someone took my baby from me. Someone stole his future, his first words, his first steps, everything he should have been. And I don't know if I'll ever understand why. But I promise you, Liam," she looked directly at the casket, "I promise whoever did this will pay. I won't stop until they pay." She collapsed then, her mother catching her, helping her back to the pew. The church was silent except for muffled sobs. Pastor Coleman cleared his throat uncomfortably and continued with prayers. Webb kept his eyes on Derek, who had turned slightly to look back at Sarah. The expression on his face lasted only a second before he controlled it, but Webb caught it. Fear. After the service, mourners filed past the casket, paying respects. Webb hung back, watching. Sarah stood beside the casket, accepting condolences, barely holding herself together. Derek stood on the opposite side, shaking hands, accepting murmured sympathies with nods and appropriate expressions of grief. Webb timed his approach carefully, joining the line when it had thinned. He stopped first at Sarah's side. "Sarah, I don't know if you remember me. I'm Bill, your cousin Janet's husband from Columbus. We met at your grandmother's funeral a few years back." Sarah looked at him with confused, red-rimmed eyes. Webb had coordinated this with her yesterday. She knew he'd be here undercover, but agreed to play along, trusting his judgment about drawing out the truth. "Bill, yes, I think I remember. Thank you for coming. I'm so sorry for your loss. If there's anything you need, just justice," Sarah said quietly. "That's all I need." Webb squeezed her hand and moved to Derek's side. This was the critical moment. If Derek recognized him, the whole operation collapsed. But he'd been counting on people's tendency not to look closely at others outside their immediate focus, especially in high-stress situations. "I'm sorry for your loss," Webb said, extending his hand. Derek's handshake was automatic, his eyes not quite focusing. "Thank you for coming. How are you holding up?" "Taking it day by day." The rehearsed response of someone who'd been asked that question 100 times already. Webb leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "This must be incredibly hard, having everyone looking at you, judging, wondering." Derek's eyes sharpened, finally focusing on Webb's face. "What do you mean?" "Just that in situations like this, people always speculate, always assume. It takes strength to hold your head up when you know what people are thinking." Derek's grip on Webb's hand tightened. "And what are people thinking? That someone in that house knows more than they're saying?" Webb held his gaze. "That the truth will come out eventually. It always does." For a moment, Webb thought he'd pushed too hard. Derek's face darkened, his jaw clenching. Then Sarah's mother approached, and Derek released Webb's hand, turning away to accept her embrace. Webb moved toward the exit, filing out with other mourners into the grey afternoon. Light rain had begun to fall. People clustered under the church's overhang, talking in hushed voices. Webb positioned himself near a group of mechanics from Derek's work, listening. "Never seemed like the type," one was saying, a heavy-set man with grease under his fingernails despite obvious scrubbing. "You never know what goes on behind closed doors," another replied. "Remember last month when Derek came in with scratches on his face? Said his cat did it, but they don't have a cat." Probably Sarah defending herself. Or maybe he's being set up. I'm just saying, innocent until proven guilty. The conversation died as Derek emerged from the church, his family flanking him. He scanned the crowd again, and Webb saw him spot Sarah standing apart with her mother and the nurses. For just a moment, Derek's mask slipped, and Webb saw raw hatred flash across his face before being replaced with appropriate grief. Webb circled around the building, positioning himself near the rear corner where he could observe without being obvious. The crowd was fragmenting, some heading to cars, others lingering to talk. Derek had broken away from his mother and brother, moving towards Sarah with purpose. Webb edged closer, staying behind a group of older women discussing flowers, but keeping Derek in his peripheral vision. He was close enough now to hear. "Sarah," Derek's voice was low but intense, "we need to talk." Sarah turned, her mother instinctively stepping between them. "Stay away from her. I have a right to talk to her. That was my son too." "Your son?" Sarah's voice rose. "You mean the son whose funeral we just attended? The son who'd be alive if what? Say it. Say what you think I did." People were noticing now, conversations dying, heads turning. Sarah's mother tried to pull her away, but Sarah stood her ground. "The police know everything, Derek. They have evidence. They have my statements. They know about the bruises, the violence, all of it." Derek stepped closer, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, but Webb's position and the sudden silence meant every word carried. "You don't know what you're talking about. You weren't there." "Exactly, I wasn't there. I was at work, trusting you with our baby, and you—" "I what?" "Finish it. Accuse me in front of everyone. Do it." The challenge hung in the air. Sarah's resolve wavered, tears streaming down her face. "I can't prove it yet, but they will. The police will prove what you did." Derek's laugh was bitter. "The police? They've got nothing. No witnesses, no evidence that means anything. Just a dead baby and a grieving mother desperate to blame someone." He leaned in, and Webb saw his mouth move near Sarah's ear. The words were meant to be private, but Webb had positioned himself perfectly to catch them. "You should be more careful what you say, Sarah. Accidents happen. Your baby isn't the only one who could have an unfortunate incident." Sarah recoiled as if struck. Her mother grabbed her, pulling her toward their car. Derek watched them go, a small, satisfied smile playing at his lips. Webb's blood ran cold. That wasn't just a threat, it was a confession wrapped in intimidation. But it wasn't enough, not for a court. It was context-dependent, deniable. He needed more. As the crowd dispersed, Webb made his way to his car, parked 3 blocks away. He'd gotten what he came for, confirmation that Derek Harlan was dangerous, calculating, and still threatening Sarah. But he'd also gotten something unexpected, the certainty that Derek believed he was going to get away with this. That confidence was a weakness. Overconfident suspects made mistakes. Webb sat in his car, watching the church in his rearview mirror as the last mourners departed. His phone buzzed. Linda Chen. "Tell me you got something," she said without preamble. Derek just threatened Sarah at their son's funeral, told her accidents happen and she should be careful, but it's not enough for court, too ambiguous. "We've got something better. Forensics found Derek's DNA under Liam's fingernails. The baby scratched his killer trying to fight back." Webb closed his eyes, 3 months old and fighting for his life. "That's it. That's our murder charge. DA's drawing up the arrest warrant now. We move tomorrow morning." "Make it tonight," Webb said. "That threat he just made, I don't trust him not to go after Sarah. We need him in custody before he decides to eliminate his biggest problem." "I'll call the judge. Marcus, good work today. Playing the cousin was risky. It paid off." Derek showed his real face, even if just for a moment. Webb started his engine. "I'll meet you at the barracks in an hour. Let's finish this." As he pulled away from Millbrook, Webb thought about Liam Harper, 3 months old, his whole life ahead of him, snuffed out by the man who was supposed to protect him. The case was solid now, the evidence was there. Derek Harlan would face justice. But Webb had learned over 15 years in homicide that justice, when it came, never brought back what was lost. It never filled the hole left behind. Sarah Harper would spend the rest of her life wondering if she could have done something different, seen the signs earlier, saved her son. That was the real tragedy, not just that Liam died, but that everyone who loved him would carry that death forever. Webb drove through the rain toward Somerset, already planning the arrest. Derek Harlan's freedom had hours left. His reckoning was coming, and Webb intended to be there to deliver it personally. March 16th, 2014, Sunday evening. The rain had intensified by the time Detective Marcus Webb and his partner, Linda Chen, pulled up to Derek Harlan's mother's house in the hilltop section of Millbrook. The modest ranch-style home sat on a quiet cul-de-sac, its yellow porch light creating a weak halo in the downpour. Two unmarked units had already positioned themselves at either end of the street, blocking potential escape routes. This wasn't Webb's first high-risk arrest, and he'd learned that cornered suspects did unpredictable things. "You sure he's here?" Linda asked, checking her service weapon out of habit. Webb nodded toward the driveway where Derek's Ford F-150 sat beside an older Honda Civic. "That's his truck. Hasn't moved since they got back from the funeral 3 hours ago." The arrest warrant had come through at 6:47 p.m., signed by Judge Patricia Morrison with unusual speed. The evidence was overwhelming. DNA under the victim's fingernails, the changed crib sheets, the history of violence, the threatening statements at the funeral. The DA had authorized charges of first-degree murder and witness intimidation. If convicted, Derek Harlan would never see freedom again. Webb's radio crackled. "Units in position," came the voice of Sergeant Tom Rodriguez. "We've got eyes on all exits. Thermal shows 3 bodies inside, living room area." "Copy that," Webb replied. He looked at Linda. "By the book. We announce we give him every chance to surrender peacefully. His mother and brother are in there. I don't want collateral casualties." They approached the front door, flanked by 2 uniformed officers in tactical vests. The porch was cluttered with potted plants and a rusted metal chair. Through the window, Webb could see the blue flicker of a television. Normal, domestic, the kind of scene that could explode into violence in seconds. Webb knocked firmly. "Pennsylvania State Police. We need to speak with Derek Harlan." Movement inside, voices. The television volume lowered. Then Linda Harlan appeared at the door, her face drawn and suspicious. She was in her late 50s with Derek's same dark eyes and the worn look of someone who'd worked hard her whole life. "What do you want? Haven't you people harassed my son enough?" "Ma'am, we have a warrant for Derek's arrest. We need him to come out peacefully." Her face hardened. "He didn't do anything. You're trying to railroad him because you can't find who really killed that baby." "Mrs. Harlan, I understand you want to protect your son, but we have evidence linking him to Liam's death. Please step aside and let us do our job." "You have no right." "Mom," Derek's voice came from behind her. "It's okay. Let them in." Linda Harlan reluctantly stepped back. Webb entered with Linda Chen close behind, the uniformed officers securing the perimeter. The living room was small and cluttered, family photos on every surface. Afghan blankets draped over a sagging couch, the smell of microwaved dinner lingering in the air. Derek stood in the center of the room, still wearing the black pants from the funeral, but having changed into a white t-shirt. His brother Kyle sat on the couch, looking young and scared at 24. Derek's posture was relaxed, almost casual, but Webb saw the tension in his shoulders, the calculation in his eyes. "Derek Harlan, you're under arrest for the murder of Liam Harper and for witness intimidation." Webb pulled out his handcuffs. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." "I know my rights," Derek interrupted, "and I'm not saying anything without my lawyer." "Smart choice." Webb approached with the cuffs. "Turn around, hands behind your back." For a moment, Derek didn't move. The room held its breath. Webb's hand moved instinctively toward his weapon, reading the potential for violence in Derek's stance. Then Derek's mother spoke. "Just do what they say, baby. We'll get you a lawyer. We'll fight this." Derek turned slowly, presenting his wrists. Webb cuffed him with practiced efficiency, not too tight, but secure. As he did, he caught the faint smell of alcohol on Derek's breath. Not drunk, but drinking, Dutch courage or genuine grief. With this man, Webb couldn't tell. "This is bullshit," Kyle said from the couch, his voice shaking. "My brother didn't kill anybody. That baby probably died from SIDS or something, and you're just looking for someone to blame. Linda Chen pulled out the warrant, handing it to Linda Harlan. All the evidence is detailed here, Ma'am. Your son will be arraigned tomorrow morning. You can contact a lawyer tonight. Evidence? What evidence? Some bruises? My grandson was colicky. Derek told me he was hard to handle. Maybe Sarah hurt him. She's the one with medical knowledge. Maybe she knew how to make it look like someone else did it. Webb had heard this before, the desperate rationalization of family members unable to accept the truth. Mrs. Harlan, we have your son's DNA under Liam's fingernails. The baby scratched his attacker trying to defend himself. We have threatening statements Derek made to Sarah just hours ago at the funeral. We have a pattern of escalating violence. This isn't a rush to judgment. This is where the evidence leads. Linda Harlan's face crumpled, years of denial crashing against reality. He's my son. He couldn't. Mom, don't. Derek's voice was sharp. Don't say anything. Don't explain anything. These people have already made up their minds. Webb guided Derek toward the door. Watch your head, he said, the ritual phrase of 1,000 arrests. Outside, the rain had become a deluge. Officers formed a corridor to the waiting patrol car, shielding Derek from the few neighbors who'd ventured onto their porches despite the weather. As they reached the car, Derek suddenly stopped, turning to face Webb. Water ran down his face, plastering his hair to his skull. In the strobing red and blue lights from the cruisers, he looked almost demonic. "You think you've got this all figured out," Derek said quietly, his voice barely audible over the rain. "You think I'm some monster who killed his own kid, but you don't know anything about what happened in that house." "Then tell me," Webb replied. "Tell me what really happened." Derek smiled, a cold expression without warmth. "My lawyer will do my talking from now on, but I'll give you something to think about, Detective. You're so sure you know the truth, but truth is funny. It's not always what it seems. Sometimes the person screaming victim the loudest is the one with the most to hide." Before Webb could respond, Derek ducked into the patrol car. The door slammed, cutting off whatever else he might have said. Webb stood in the rain, processing. That last statement, was it deflection, or was Derek suggesting something about Sarah? Linda Chen appeared at his elbow. "What did he say to you?" "He tried to plant doubt, suggested Sarah might be hiding something." Webb watched the patrol car pull away, Derek's face visible through the rain-streaked window. Classic abuser tactic. Blame the victim. Create alternative narratives. "You think there's any merit to it?" Webb considered. His gut said no. Sarah's grief was genuine, her cooperation complete, her story consistent. But 15 years of detective work had taught him to question everything, to look at cases from every angle. "We'll verify her alibi again. Talk to her colleagues at the hospital. Confirm she was on shift when Liam died. But my instinct says Derek's just trying to create reasonable doubt before trial." They returned to Linda Harlan's house to collect Derek's personal effects: wallet, phone, the clothes he'd been wearing during the time of the murder. Kyle Harlan watched them with unconcealed hostility. "You're making a mistake," he said. "Derek's got a temper, yeah, but he's not a killer. I know my brother." Linda Chen looked up from bagging Derek's phone. "When's the last time you saw Derek with Liam?" "I don't know. Couple weeks ago? I don't live here." "How did Derek seem with the baby?" Kyle hesitated. "He was adjusting. It's hard, you know, being a new parent. The crying, the money stress, but lots of dads struggle with that. Doesn't mean they murder their kids." "Did Derek ever tell you he was having violent thoughts about Liam? About Sarah?" "No, never." But Kyle's eyes shifted left, a classic tell of deception. Webb moved closer. "Kyle, lying to protect your brother makes you an accessory. If Derek told you something, confided in you about problems at home, about losing control, you need to tell us now." "I don't know anything," Kyle insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. Linda Harlan re-entered the room, her eyes red from crying. "Stop interrogating my son. You already took Derek. Isn't that enough?" "We're just collecting evidence, Ma'am," Webb said gently. "We'll be out of your way shortly." As they worked, Webb noticed a desktop computer in the corner of the living room. "Mrs. Harlan, does Derek use that computer?" Sometimes. Why?" "We'll need to take it for analysis. It's part of the evidence collection." "You can't just take our things." Linda Chen showed her the warrant again. "We can, and we are. Any electronic devices Derek had access to are subject to seizure." The computer was unplugged and bagged. Webb made mental note to have the tech team go through it thoroughly. Emails, browser history, any documents that might shed light on Derek's state of mind in the days before the murder. They left the Harlan house at 8:15 p.m., their vehicles loaded with evidence. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the streets slick and reflective. Webb drove in silence, his mind working through the case timeline, looking for gaps, potential weaknesses a defense attorney might exploit. "You're quiet," Linda observed, "just thinking about what Derek said, about Sarah having the most to hide. You don't actually suspect her, do you?" "No, but we need to be absolutely certain. If there's even a 1% chance Derek's telling the truth and Sarah was somehow involved, we need to know before this goes to trial. The last thing we want is the defense introducing evidence we missed that creates reasonable doubt." They arrived at the Somerset Barracks at 8:40 p.m. Derek had been processed and was waiting in an interrogation room with a public defender who'd been hastily assigned. Webb watched through the two-way mirror as Derek sat calmly, whispering to the lawyer, a young woman named Jennifer Torres, who looked fresh out of law school. "Think she'll advise him to talk?" Linda asked. "No competent lawyer would, but let's try anyway." They entered the room. Torres immediately held up her hand. "My client has nothing to say to you." "Fair enough," Webb said, sitting down across from Derek. "But maybe he'd like to hear what we have. DNA evidence, witness statements, physical evidence of prior abuse, a threat made at the victim's funeral. Derek, you're looking at life without parole. This is your last chance to tell your side of the story before it goes to trial." Torres leaned close to Derek, whispering urgently. He shook his head. "Detective, unless you're offering a plea deal, which I doubt at this stage, we have nothing to discuss. My client maintains his innocence and will prove it in court." Webb pulled out a photo of Liam, taken the day he was born, tiny, perfect. His eyes closed in sleep. He slid it across the table. "This is who we're talking about. 3 months old. His whole life ahead of him. Someone took that away. Someone in that house on Maple Street strangled this baby until he stopped breathing." Derek stared at the photo, his jaw working. For just a moment, Webb thought he saw genuine emotion crack through the facade. Grief, guilt. But then it was gone, replaced by cold indifference. "My client has nothing to say," Torres repeated. Webb stood. "Fine. We'll see you at arraignment tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Judge Morrison's courtroom." He paused at the door. "Derek, I've been doing this for 15 years. I've seen dozens of men like you, guys who think they're smarter than everyone else, who think they can talk their way out of anything, but evidence doesn't lie. DNA doesn't have an agenda, and dead babies can't be explained away with charm and deflection." "Are you done grandstanding, detective?" Torres asked coldly. "For now." Webb left the room, the photo of Liam still on the table. Outside, Linda was on her phone, her expression troubled. She hung up and turned to Webb. "That was the hospital. I asked them to verify Sarah's timesheet for the night of March 13th. She clocked in at 2:52 p.m. and clocked out at 11:23 p.m. Security footage confirms she was on the pediatric ward the entire shift, never left the building. So she's completely alibied for the time of death. Completely. There's no way she could have killed Liam. She was surrounded by colleagues and patients from 3 p.m. until almost midnight." Webb felt the last piece of doubt evaporate. Derek's insinuation about Sarah was exactly what he'd suspected. A desperate attempt to create confusion, to suggest alternative suspects when the evidence against him was overwhelming. Good. That closes that door. Derek killed his son, and tomorrow morning he's going to be formally charged with it. They spent the next 2 hours reviewing every piece of evidence, preparing for the arraignment. The case file was thick now. Autopsy reports, crime scene photos, witness statements, forensic analysis, phone records. Everything pointed in the same direction, to Derek Harlan, alone with his infant son, losing control in a moment of rage and then attempting to cover it up. At 11:00 p.m., Webb finally headed home to his apartment in Somerset. The place was sparse, one bedroom, minimal furniture, more functional than comfortable. He'd been divorced for 6 years, his ex-wife having tired of the long hours and emotional distance that came with investigating humanity's worst impulses. He didn't blame her. This job consumed you if you let it. He poured himself 2 fingers of bourbon, his nightly ritual after particularly difficult cases. The liquid burned going down, but it helped quiet the images that would otherwise follow him into sleep. Liam's tiny body in that crib, the bruises on his arms, the defensive wounds under his fingernails. 3 months old, and he'd fought back. That detail haunted Webb more than anything else. The baby had tried to defend himself, had scratched at the hands cutting off his air, had struggled in those final terrible moments before darkness took him. Webb's phone buzzed. A text from Sarah Harper. "Thank you for arresting him. I can finally breathe knowing he can't hurt anyone else. Will you be at the arraignment tomorrow?" He replied, "I'll be there. You should consider attending with a victim advocate. The DA's office can arrange one." Her response came quickly. "I want to look him in the eyes when they charge him. I want him to see that I'm not afraid anymore." Webb understood that need. Victims often talked about reclaiming power, about standing up to their abusers in the formal setting of a courtroom where the power dynamic had shifted. He hoped it would bring Sarah some measure of peace, though he doubted anything could truly heal the wound of losing a child. He finished his bourbon and went to bed, but sleep was elusive. He kept thinking about Derek's parting words. Truth is not always what it seems. It was almost certainly manipulation, but something about the confidence in Derek's voice nagged at him. Webb had learned to trust his instincts, but he'd also learned that sometimes suspects projected confidence precisely because they had nothing left to lose. Derek Harlan was facing life in prison. His relationship with Sarah was destroyed. His reputation in Millbrook was ruined. All he had left was the slim hope that a jury might believe his denials over the mountain of evidence against him. It was a hope built on sand, and Webb intended to wash it away completely. Tomorrow, the formal process would begin. Derek Harlan would stand before Judge Morrison and hear the charges against him. The case would move toward trial, toward justice for a baby who never got the chance to live. Webb finally drifted off around 2:00 a.m., his last conscious thought a promise to Liam Harper. "I'll make sure he pays for what he did to you. I won't let him get away with this." In a cell 3 floors below, Derek Harlan lay awake on a thin mattress, staring at the ceiling, his mind working through scenarios, calculating odds, planning his defense. The legal battle was just beginning, and both sides knew that everything, freedom, truth, justice, hung in the balance. March 17th, 2014, Monday morning. The Somerset County Courthouse was the imposing structure of grey stone and tall windows, built in the 1920s with the kind of architectural gravitas meant to inspire respect for the law. By 8:30 a.m., a small crowd had gathered on the front steps despite the cold. Local reporters, curious onlookers, and a handful of protesters holding signs that read, "Justice for Liam and protect our children." Detective Marcus Webb stood inside the security checkpoint, watching through the glass doors as the media set up their cameras. This case had captured the region's attention quickly. The murder of an infant always did. Pennsylvania hadn't seen a case this emotionally charged since the Sandusky scandal, and the press was hungry for details. "Circus is in town," Linda Chen said, appearing beside him with 2 coffees. "Channel 6 tried to interview me in the parking lot. I told them to contact the DA's office for statements." Webb accepted the coffee gratefully. "Sarah here yet?" "Victim advocate brought her in through the side entrance 10 minutes ago. She's in the DA's prep room." Linda paused. "Marcus, she looks fragile, like she might shatter if someone breathes on her wrong." "Losing a child and finding out your partner killed him would break anyone." Webb checked his watch. "Arraignment starts in 20 minutes. Derek's public defender filed a motion for bail, but Morrison will never grant it. Not on a murder one charge with witness intimidation." They made their way to courtroom 3B on the 2nd floor. The room was already filling, mostly court personnel, a few lawyers waiting for other cases, and the media representatives allowed inside. Sarah Harper sat in the front row, behind the prosecution table, flanked by her mother and a victim advocate named Rachel Simmons. Sarah wore a navy blue dress and minimal makeup, her blonde hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She looked years older than her 24 years. Webb caught her eye and nodded. She managed a small, tight smile in return. Assistant District Attorney Robert Michaels approached, a thick file under his arm. At 52, Michaels was a veteran prosecutor with an impressive conviction rate and a reputation for meticulous preparation. "Detective Webb, Detective Chen. Hell of a case you built. The evidence is airtight." "Think his lawyer will try for a plea?" Linda asked. Michael shook his head. "Not yet. Jennifer Torres is young but smart. She'll wait to see what discovery reveals, look for any weaknesses. But between you and me, there aren't any. Derek Harlan is going down for this." "What about the defense strategy? Any indication what angle they're taking?" "Torres filed a motion requesting all evidence related to Sarah Harper's whereabouts and mental state. She's going to try to create doubt about the mother, suggest maybe Sarah did it and framed Derek." Webb felt his jaw tighten. "Sarah was at work. We have ironclad verification, time cards, security footage, witness statements from 12 nurses." "I know. But Torres has to do something. When the evidence is this strong against your client, you throw everything at the wall and hope something sticks." Michaels glanced at his notes. "There's one more thing. Derek's mother posted on Facebook last night, claiming her son is being railroaded by incompetent police desperate to close the case. It's getting shared around Millbrook." "Social media witch hunt," Linda muttered. "Great." The bailiff called for order. "All rise." The Honorable Judge Patricia Morrison presiding. Judge Morrison entered from her chambers, a woman in her mid-60s with steel-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. She'd been on the bench for 20 years and had a reputation for running a tight courtroom with zero tolerance for theatrics. "Be seated." Her voice carried authority. "Case number 2014 CR 1147, Commonwealth of Pennsylvania versus Derek Allen Harlan. Charges are murder in the first degree and witness intimidation. Mr. Harlan, please rise." A side door opened, and Derek was led in wearing an orange jumpsuit, his hands cuffed in front. He'd shaved and his hair was combed, but prison pallor had already begun to set in. His eyes swept the courtroom, landing briefly on Sarah before moving to his mother and brother in the back row. Jennifer Torres stood beside him, her expression professionally neutral. "Your Honor," Jennifer Torres appearing for the defendant. "Mr. Michaels for the Commonwealth," the ADA announced. Judge Morrison reviewed the file before her. "Mr. Harlan, you're charged with murder in the first degree in the death of your 3-month-old son, Liam Harper, and with intimidating a witness, specifically the child's mother, Sarah Harper. These are serious charges carrying a maximum sentence of life imprisonment without possibility of parole. Do you understand these charges? Derek's voice was steady. Yes, Your Honor. How do you plead? Not guilty, Your Honor. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Judge Morrison's gavel cracked once. Order. Ms. Torres, I assume you're requesting bail. Yes, Your Honor. My client has strong ties to the community, no prior criminal record, and no flight risk. We request reasonable bail be set. Michaels rose immediately. Your Honor, the Commonwealth strongly objects. Mr. Harlan is charged with murdering an infant in an especially brutal manner, manual strangulation. We have DNA evidence, witness testimony, and physical evidence placing him at the scene. Additionally, Mr. Harlan made threatening statements to Ms. Harper just yesterday at the victim's funeral, statements overheard by multiple witnesses, including an undercover police officer. He represents a clear danger to the community, and specifically to Ms. Harper. Torres countered quickly. The alleged threatening statements are taken out of context and subject to interpretation. My client was grieving his son at a funeral. Emotions were high. That doesn't constitute genuine witness intimidation. Judge Morrison held up her hand. I've reviewed the arrest warrant and supporting documentation. The evidence presented is substantial and deeply disturbing. Mr. Harlan's DNA was found under the victim's fingernails, indicating the infant fought his attacker. Bruising patterns consistent with adult male hands were found on the victim's throat. Prior injuries suggesting a pattern of abuse were documented, and multiple witnesses have provided statements about Mr. Harlan's history of violence toward Ms. Harper. She leaned forward, her gaze fixed on Derek. Mr. Harlan, I find that you represent both a flight risk and a danger to the community, particularly to Ms. Harper. Bail is denied. You will remain in custody pending trial. Your Honor, Torres began. My decision is final, counsel. Mr. Michaels, what is the Commonwealth's timeline for trial? We're prepared to move quickly, Your Honor. Given the nature of the case and the strength of our evidence, we anticipate being ready for trial within 60 days. Ms. Torres, will the defense be ready in that time frame? Torres glanced at Derek, who nodded slightly. Yes, Your Honor, though we'll need adequate time for discovery and investigation. Discovery materials will be provided to the defense within 14 days. I'm setting a preliminary hearing for April 7th and trial for May 19th. That gives both sides ample time to prepare. Judge Morrison made notations. Are there any other motions at this time? Torres stood again. Your Honor, the defense requests a gag order on all parties to prevent this case from being tried in the media. Michaels was on his feet. The Commonwealth has no objection to a reasonable gag order, Your Honor. Granted. All parties, witnesses, and law enforcement are hereby ordered not to discuss this case with media representatives. Violations will result in contempt charges. Judge Morrison's gavel fell. We're adjourned. Mr. Harlan will be remanded to Somerset County Jail pending trial. As the bailiff led Derek away, he turned to look directly at Sarah. The expression on his face sent chills through Webb. It wasn't anger or hatred, but something colder, calculation, as if Derek was studying her, measuring something, planning. Sarah met his gaze without flinching, her hands clenched in her lap. Her mother put an arm around her shoulders. The courtroom began to clear. Webb and Linda approached Sarah and the victim advocate. Ms. Harper, how are you holding up? Webb asked. Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper. He looked at me like I was a problem he needed to solve. Even now, even locked up, he's still trying to intimidate me. Rachel Simmons, the advocate, spoke up. We're going to request a protective order, Detective. Even though he's in custody, he could try to contact her through third parties. Good idea, Linda said. We'll support that request fully. Sarah stood, her legs visibly shaking. When will the trial be? I need to know when this will finally be over. May 19th, Webb replied. 7 weeks. I know that seems like a long time, but it gives us opportunity to build the strongest possible case. In the meantime, if Derek or anyone connected to him tries to contact you, you call me immediately." Webb handed her his card with his personal cell number written on the back. Sarah clutched it like a lifeline. "Thank you, detective, for believing me, for catching him." Her eyes filled with tears. "I keep thinking about that night. I was at work, taking care of other people's sick children, and my own baby was." She couldn't finish. "This wasn't your fault," Webb said firmly. "You were working, doing your job. Derek made the choice to harm Liam. That's on him, not you." They escorted Sarah and her mother out through the side exit, avoiding the media throng. Webb watched them drive away before returning inside, where Michaels was conferring with his team. With Judge Morrison denying bail, ADA Michaels pushed forward with building an airtight case, digging into Derek's temper, his phone records, and his digital life. The evidence pile was growing fast: autopsy, text threats, witness statements. Yet Webb remained uneasy. Derek seemed unrealistically calm for a man facing life without parole. Reviewing phone records, Webb noted Derek's 2:47 a.m. text on the night Liam died. "Handled the problem, don't call," followed by hours of silence. Suspiciously, Derek also called Kyle 17 times the week prior, long conversations that might reveal premeditation. Webb planned to confront Kyle once they had more leverage from Derek's computer analysis. But before Webb could move, Kyle called him directly. Nervous and shaken, he insisted on meeting privately at a Route 219 rest stop. Though risky, Webb went, believing Kyle might finally turn on his brother. Kyle tearfully confessed Derek had drunkenly called the night before the murder, saying he wished the baby would just disappear. Kyle now believed Derek meant every word. He also revealed finding a hidden notebook in Derek's garage while picking up his things after the arrest. Kyle showed a photo, Derek's handwriting, detailing escalating resentment toward Liam and Sarah, and to Webb's horror, entries suggesting deliberate planning. Maybe if there was an accident. Sidees happens all the time. Tonight, can't wait anymore, problem solved. With a warrant, Webb and Linda retrieved the notebook from the garage exactly where Kyle described. The entries showed worsening frustration, physical aggression, and a clear timeline leading to the murder. It looked like definitive proof this wasn't an impulsive act. It was a planned killing. Linda summed it up. "This changes everything. Derek didn't snap, he prepared for this." Webb logged Kyle's notebook discovery as a breakthrough. Back at the barracks, ADA Michaels was ecstatic. The entries suggested premeditation, escalating resentment, and a plan to kill Liam while Sarah was at work. They discussed amending charges and even the possibility of the death penalty. On paper, the case against Derek looked overwhelming. Physical evidence, threats, and now a written confession. Yet Webb still felt uneasy. Derek's calm at arraignment and the way he'd looked at Sarah nagged at him. His doubts deepened when Sarah called in a panic. Someone had slipped an anonymous letter under her door. The truth always comes out. Ask yourself who had the most to lose. Derek Harlan knows more than he's saying, and so do you. Webb had the letter bagged and put Sarah in protective custody, noting the handwriting wasn't Derek's. Someone on the outside was trying to manipulate or intimidate her. The next day, Webb met public defender Jennifer Torres at the jail. She said Derek wanted to talk, but only if the charge was reduced to second-degree murder. Webb scoffed, pointing to the notebook, especially the March 13 entry, "Tonight, problem solved." Torres calmly replied that Derek didn't write that line. She claimed someone with access to Derek's handwriting and garage had forged entries to frame him, someone like his brother, Kyle. She produced a recovered text exchange from 2 days before the murder. An unknown number asked, "When are you going to do something about Derek?" And Kyle replied, "Soon, I have a plan. He won't be a problem much longer. Torres argued Kyle found the notebook, knew Derek's darkest fears from their calls, and could have weaponized them into fake entries. Derek, she said, admitted making mistakes to protect someone, but insisted he didn't kill Liam. An emergency meeting with ADA Michaels and forensic experts followed. Preliminary analysis showed the March 10 and 13 entries had different pen pressure and handling patterns. As if those pages had been touched more recently and more often, forgery was possible. As they debated next steps, Webb received a burner text. Derek didn't kill Liam, but he knows who did. The truth will destroy everything. Stop digging or more people get hurt. Shaken, Webb went back to Sarah. In her mother's living room, she described Kyle as polite, sometimes alone with Liam, and vaguely resentful of Derek's favorite son status in their family. Webb pressed her to rethink the night of the murder, what she saw when she got home, whether anything felt off, and whether Kyle had been there earlier. The neat story of Derek as a lone monster was starting to fracture. Sarah suddenly remembers Kyle visiting the night Liam died, a detail that makes Detective Webb reconsider the case. Moments later, Kyle Harlan walks into the station and confesses to murdering baby Liam. In interrogation, he claims Derek was miserable as a father, passed out drunk that night, and Kyle snapped, believing he was helping his brother. He even says he framed Derek afterward by planting DNA and forging notebook entries, but Webb immediately spots holes. Sarah saw Liam alive hours after Kyle allegedly killed him. Kyle insists she misremembered, but Webb knows her background in pediatric care makes that unlikely. Defense attorney Jennifer Torres storms in, accusing police of tampering. She reveals digital proof that Sarah's hospital clock-out time was secretly altered on police databases, giving her a fake alibi. The edits were made from a terminal inside the department itself. Realizing someone in law enforcement is involved, Webb connects the dots. Sergeant Tom Rodriguez, whose daughter works with Sarah, had the access and motive to falsify records. Both Sarah and Rodriguez are arrested that night. Rodriguez confesses Sarah called him in panic, claiming Derek killed Liam. He changed her timesheet to protect her. But when confronted, Sarah finally tells the truth. She got home exhausted, found Derek drunk, and Liam screaming. Desperate for silence, she pressed her hand over his mouth and didn't stop. When he died, Derek woke up, found her, and agreed to take the blame out of guilt and love. Derek then begged Kyle to help muddy the case by faking a confession, but Kyle broke under pressure and confessed the wrong parts. The entire tragic scheme comes into focus. A grieving mother who lost control, a father ready to sacrifice himself, a brother making everything worse, and a police officer destroying his career to shield who he thought was a victim. Sarah is charged with murder and conspiracy. Derek will face accessory charges. Rodriguez is suspended pending prosecution. Webb reflects on the shattered lives. Liam is still gone, and the people who loved him will now pay a steep price. Justice comes, but it brings no peace.